All right, good evening, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. First, I'd like to welcome everybody to our next Air Talks is listening session. This is like the third in a series that we're doing. By way of just a quick introduction, my name is Rich Boyd. I am the Assistant Division Chief of the Transportation and Toxics Division. And before we go too further, we're going to have a quick little orientation about our Zoom protocols, but I'm going to pause for a second to give our interpreter a chance to interpret.
Sí, muy buenas tardes a todos. ¿Verdad? Vamos a estar comenzando esto. Yo soy Rich Boyd. Y pues, momentito vamos a empezar. Okay, Rich.
Okay, and with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Amanda, who's going to walk through our Zoom protocols, and then we'll get started soon after that. Amanda?
Muy bien, ahora con esto voy a pasárselo a Amanda. Ella va a repasar los protocolos de Zoom y después pasaremos a nuestra presentación. Amanda, por favor.
Thank you. Okay, so as a quick disclaimer, we are recording this meeting and it will be made available to the public.
Muy bien, solamente queríamos decir de que estamos grabando esta reunión y la vamos a hacer disponible para el público.
So we have language interpretation available through Zoom today. And the way that you'll access that is you'll click the globe in the bottom of your screen.
Muy bien, tenemos interpretación para esta reunión hoy. La forma como van a hacer esto es que van a ir abajo en su pantalla, van a ver el globito como un mundo y van a elegir su idioma.
And you'll also have the interpretation when selecting Spanish to mute the original audio.
También van a tener en la interpretación la manera que pueden elegir de apagar el audio original.
If you're using a cell phone Zoom app, there'll be 3 dots in the bottom corner. That'll take you to a More menu and you'll have the option for interpretation there.
Si están usando un teléfono para esta reunión, van a tener 3 puntitos ahí en su teléfono donde pueden hacerle clic ahí para escuchar la interpretación de esa manera.
Next slide. If you have any technical difficulties with the interpretation, please send a chat to, and it's * tech support, Eugene.
Si tienen cualquier problema técnico, entonces pueden mandar ustedes su pregunta o la situación que estén teniendo a Jean, asterisco, tech support.
Thank you. And then we do encourage you to raise your hands if you're in the Spanish channel, but if you prefer to send a question as a chat, feel free to do so in Spanish and we'll ask our interpreters to interpret your question.
Preferimos que levanten su mano ahí en el icono para si tienen cualquier pregunta, pero les animamos mejor que por favor pongan su pregunta en el chat.
If you're calling into the conference, you won't be able to access simultaneous translation. So instead, we have a Spanish conference line. Next slide, please.
Si están llamando por la conferencia, van a tener una línea de conferencia en la que pueden llamar.
So if you're having any trouble accessing translation through Zoom, please use this conference line.
Si tienen cualquier dificultad a través de Zoom, por favor, es en esta línea de conferencia.
That number is 866-803-2146.
El número es el 866-803-2146.
And the passcode is 1083550.
La contraseña es 1083550.
Are there any questions for how to access translation?
¿Alguna pregunta de cómo accesar la traducción? Interpretación.
Okay, so we'll end sequential translation now. Thank you, Francisco. And please take advantage of the channel or the conference line.
Muy bien, vamos ahora a terminar con la interpretación consecutiva. Por favor, tomen ventaja de la línea de interpretación ahora. Bien, thank you.
Next slide. So we do have it set to mute everyone when they enter, but if for whatever reason you do become unmuted, please be sure to mute yourself to avoid distraction unless you're speaking. We also ask that you rename yourself if you're representing an organization, or if you're from Carb, please include Carb in your name. In order to do that, in the top right corner of your screen, there's 3 dots. When you select that, there should be an option to rename yourself. If you have any questions for how to do that, again, please use the chat. Next slide. Okay, and then we do look forward to hearing from everyone, but like we said, we have it muted automatically. So what we'll do is we'll ask you to raise your hand, and then once you're called on by Ugo, you'll get a notification that the host would like you to unmute. Please unmute yourself at that time. And we just ask that once you're done speaking, you mute yourself again. The mute button is found at the bottom left hand of your screen. And if you're calling in, you'll use *6. Next slide. And then we also encourage you to use your video if you're comfortable. And that icon is right next to the microphone icon. Thank you. Next slide. We'll be using raise hand today. So if you'd like to comment, please raise your hand. There's 2 locations this could be depending on your version of Zoom. So it'll either be under your participant list or under your reactions. If you're calling in from the conference line, you'll press *9 to raise your hand. There have been some issues with that not working. So Ugo will check periodically with people on the conference line to see if you have a comment. If you do at that time, please unmute yourself and begin talking. We don't want to miss your comment. We'll also check in regularly with the Spanish conference line. Next slide. And we also are utilizing the chat feature today. So you'll be able to chat with everyone and also chat privately with the host and co-host. And we'll also be sending a follow-up email for this meeting with links to the recordings in both English and Spanish. If you'd like to receive that follow-up, please send your information into the chat. If you don't want everyone to see it, you can chat privately with me. When you open up your chat box, there it says "to," and then there's a drop-down that currently should say "everyone." When you select that, you can scroll down and find my name. And please send me your email if you'd like to receive the follow-up email for this meeting. And again, if you have any tech questions, you can message Eugene. His name is *Zoom Tech Questions Eugene. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. All right, so the purpose of today's listening session is to promote understanding of the regulatory process for air toxics. Like I mentioned at the beginning, this is the 3rd in a series of these listening sessions that we have been doing. And with the exception of the first one, the topics that we do for each subsequent one is driven by you. And so we solicit feedback and we use that to prepare for the next session. And so we're interested in hearing about your concerns about the regulatory process and basically how we can help better serve your communities. And so we do have a short presentation just to kind of prime things. And then after that, we'll get into some open discussion. And so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn the presentation over to Michelle Komlenik, who's one of the managers in the Transportation Toxics Division for the presentation. Michelle?
Thanks, Rich. Actually, it's Michelle. Michelle Houghton's going to go ahead and give the presentation.
Yeah, Michelle Houghton.
Thanks.
Who's one of the staff people in the division.
Yes,
so
thanks.
All right. So we developed this presentation in response to your feedback from our last meeting. During our last listening session, community members were interested in understanding more about how we develop our regulations and how the community can give input into that process. So let me begin by giving you an overview of our rulemaking process. The first question is, where do we start? How do we identify what air toxic sources need to be controlled? We begin by collecting as much information as we can about the pollutant of concern and where it comes from. There are many sources of information that can be used to help us identify where a pollutant is coming from and if controls are needed. These sources of information include meeting with communities to learn about the pollutants and the sources they are concerned about. Our statewide air monitoring network helps us track pollutants of concern. We are able to use this information to help understand the levels of toxic air pollutants in certain locations or at a regional level. As more air monitors go online in communities, we can learn more about pollutants on a neighborhood scale. We use research studies to help us learn more about the science of how pollutants react in the atmosphere and the health effects that they may cause. We also collect emissions information that helps us to understand the types and amount of pollutants that are released from sources. We also look at available emission control technologies to help us understand the most effective control strategies. So before we go on, we want to learn more about you. Our first question is, where do you live? What part of the state or community are you from? Please put your answers in the chat. And this information will let us know if our communications are reaching a wide audience. So again, our question is, where do you live? What community are you in? And if you could put answers in the chat, that'd be great. The second question is going to be a polling question. So when the poll comes up, you're going to select the sources of air toxics that are the greatest concern in your community. Looks like we're getting responses coming in. How's it looking out there? Rich, how's it going?
It's looking like the responses have slowed down, and it looks like mobile sources right now are in the lead, followed up by warehouses and rail yards, auto body shops, and metal finishing processing operations. And now it's looking like there's no more movement in the results.
All right.
Maybe for folks that hit other, go ahead and put other in the chat. That would be helpful.
Okay, let's go ahead and quickly share those results before we move on.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, next slide. All right, so we're going to move back to the regulatory information. Once we have determined the need to reduce emissions, we have several different tools available to us to help us reduce those emissions. An airborne toxic control measure, or an ATCM, is a regulation designed to control emissions of toxic air contaminants. Carb has the authority to develop ATCMs for either a stationary source like a factory or a mobile source like cars and trucks. The ATCMs are statewide rules that regulate emissions for a specific type of source throughout the state. For example, dry cleaners is a statewide regulation. Later in the presentation, we will be talking about the process used for developing an ATCM, and we will be asking for your input on how to prioritize which sources we shall look at for the development of the next ATCM. In some cases, local air district rules may be a more appropriate regulatory option as compared to a statewide ATCM. For example, when there are only a few of the sources in the state, a local rule may be a better option. In some cases, a source may already be subject to an existing regulation, but it is not complying, and it may need an enforcement action brought against it to lower its emissions. Guidance documents can also be a useful tool for air districts, industry, and the community to reduce emissions and include things like best practices and other ways to reduce emissions. Incentives are another way that facilities can reduce emissions. Typically, incentives can provide funding for facilities to reduce their emissions beyond what is already required by law. Land use planning can also be an effective tool. Although the local governments have the primary authority over land use decisions, Carb can comment on the air quality aspects of certain projects through the CEQA process. Here we can make recommendations on ways to reduce or eliminate emissions. Another option are suggested control measures. Under California law, the 35 local air districts have the authority for adopting control measures for certain non-vehicular sources. For example, coatings such as paints. Carb can develop suggested control measures which serve as an example rule that can be used by the air districts throughout California. Here is an overview of the process for developing an airborne toxic control measure. One of the first things we need to do is evaluate the pollutant of concern and where it comes from. As I discussed in the first slide, we use data such as monitoring data, emissions information, and research to understand where the pollutant comes from and how much is in the community. In the next step, we evaluate possible control options, such as adding a filter, replacing or eliminating the toxic pollutant, or changing the manufacturing process. Carb staff is also required to conduct a health risk assessment and a cost analysis. Throughout the process, Carb will be holding group meetings to discuss the proposed regulation. These meetings provide opportunity for the public to be involved in the process. You can participate in the working group meetings by signing up for the email distribution list for the regulation. By doing this, you will receive notices for the working group and other meetings. You can also reach out directly to the regulatory staff, which can be found on the program's webpage or through a contact us email. The fourth step is for Carb staff to combine everything we learn into a draft report. This report will be discussed at public meetings. We will collect all the comments and make changes to the draft regulatory language based on those comments. The draft report will then be presented to the Carb board for their adoption as a new ATCM. The new ATCM will then be enforced either by Carb staff or by the local air districts. So this concludes the part of the session that discusses our regulatory process. Now we want to hear from you. So our first question is, do you have any questions on what we have presented so far? We've also included a few questions on this slide that might help us get the conversation started. We have staff here today that are here to listen and answer any of your questions. For folks that would like to speak, please raise your hand and Ugo will call on you, or you can place your comments or questions in the chat. Rich, do you want to introduce anybody in the panel before we get started?
Yes, just so folks know who's going to be responding, to questions that may come up to the extent you need a response to them. And so we, like Michelle mentioned, we do have a number of folks here. One is Robert Krieger, who is the chief of the risk reduction branch within TTD. Also have Michelle Komlinek, who's one of the managers in the branch. And then several staff people, Stephen Yee, Greg Harris, who is another manager within the branch, Eugene Rubin, Lynn Baker, and of course, Michelle Houghton, who you know from just giving the presentation. And the format that we're going to follow, there isn't a time limit for your comments. You're not going to see a clock come up like you might see at our board meetings. We want to hear from you. We want to hear what's on your mind. We want to hear what you have to say. I apologize, I didn't realize my camera was off. What you have to say, and but at the same time, if you've already had a chance to make a comment or two, and we'll do our best to try to facilitate this. Let's make sure that everybody's had a chance to comment. The general plan is it's now approaching 5:30. We plan to go to about 6:45, where we have some final housekeeping items to take care of, and then we will judge the time from there. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ugo to take us through any comments and questions that folks wish to make and information they wish to share with us.
Great, thanks, Rich. Okay, so to start us off, I have not seen, we have one raised hand and we have a couple questions in the chat. So I'll go ahead and start with the person that raised their hand, and then we'll get to the chat questions and the phone lines after that. So the first question is from Rachel Rose for LA. You can unmute yourself and speak. Go ahead and ask your question. So I believe.
Hi, everyone.
There we go.
Yeah. Hi. Okay, so I'm a former board member of the Rampart Village Neighborhood Council, as well as the president. I've served as of last week. We seated a new board, and I'm no longer president. But I've also been working with, or part of, the Alliance of River Communities here in Los Angeles. And through that alliance, and it's an alliance of neighborhood councils that are along the river, we have been given presentations on the LA River Master Plan, as well as the proposals for a park at what is known as the G1 and G2 parcels. It is an old train repair spot, piece of land, and it is a brownfield. There are heavy metal toxins in the soil. We have been, at least for the last, since I've been on the alliance, which is going on 4 years now, we have been asking the city of Los Angeles to put air monitors up because we know that the dust being kicked up from the site, there's nothing on the site except dirt, is blowing into the community. And there are a number of schools that are right there along those parcels. It's also known as Taylor Yards. We have had Dtsc into our meetings, and actually Jessica Swan called out the representative from the mayor's office a couple of weeks ago at one of our alliance meetings, when he said, oh, well, we haven't been actually asked to install air monitors. And she turned around and she flipped out. She was like, well, you don't have to wait on me. And so, we've been trying to get air monitors set up because they are proposing to do construction there. They are proposing to do brownfield remediation. They've already done some construction with the construction of a bridge, and it has kicked up dust. And what we want to know is, what is the base level right now, so that when construction does start to happen, and the air, and we have air monitors, how do we know that the things are getting worse or better or whatever? So we have been asking the city of Los Angeles for years to give us air monitoring devices that could be read by the public in certain locations around the site. And as of today, we still don't have any air monitoring equipment. And so what can Carb do to facilitate this? Because, we have a predominantly area of Hispanics that are along the river there. And, these communities are at risk because of this. And so my question is, what can we do through Carb to get these monitors in place?
Robert, do you want to try to take that one?
Yeah, I'll try and take that one. Yeah, thanks for your comment. That's a good question. I mean, that's something that we have been working at at the agency level to determine, at least through what sources are contributing to the air toxins in and around near facilities, and actually ports and rail yards and those types of things which are more area sources. But yes, that's a question that we have been taking on. And in particular, we've been addressing some of those issues through our 617 program, where we look at the communities and the sources and establish even select communities a air monitoring program, which in many of these communities has already been implemented, and they're actively being monitored within these communities. Specifically, I would think that as we expand that effort through 617 and reach out to additional communities that are going to be impacted disproportionately, we will be taking on, and we will be working with the districts to establish, and as well the communities, to establish a monitoring program within those areas as well. So if you have the specifics for your community in itself, we can check with our 617 group here at Carb to see what the process is, and to look at ways where maybe that community might be the next up for assessing or implementing a monitoring program within your communities. I know our research division has also taken on some of the issues and has started to look at different sensor technologies and low-cost monitors within communities as well. So there's some research that's being done as well. And so we do really appreciate your comments, and we take it to heart that some of this monitoring needs to be stepped up. We also have our monitoring laboratory division that does other things, such as going with their mobile source, mobile monitoring programs that go to communities as well, and set up a mobile platform, which they can go right to the community specifically to address the air toxics monitoring and other pollutant monitoring programs to help assess the 617 programs, but also local district programs as well. So with that, if you want to be able to provide your information to myself, I'll follow up further to see what programs are out there and what can be done from Carb's perspective.
Yes, and I would like to just right quick to extend an invitation to one of our monthly alliance meetings. Again, it is an alliance of neighborhood councils in the city of Los Angeles. We have 99 neighborhood councils, and those people who sit on the board are elected LA city officials.
Good, thank you.
Okay, did we have any other folks from Carb who wanted to chime in on response to that question before I move on? Okay, great. Well, I will move on to the next person on our list. So we have Ladonna Williams. Go ahead and unmute and feel free to speak.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I know it's been a long day for folks. So I have probably a question and a couple of comments. So I was just wondering if you all have read the recent headlines about the 5 dead wells that were found in less than a month in the Bay Area or in the Bay waters. And I know, through these processes, when we ask, say, Carb about a water-related issue, they'll say, well, that's not our issue because we do air. And then we ask the air district if this is your issue. And I'm not saying we didn't get a chance to talk about the well issue. I didn't find this out until later, but I'm just saying we asked them about a particular air issue, and it would be water. For instance, we're concerned about vapor intrusion from old gas stations or old dry cleaners, and the results being vapor intrusion. Yet if we go to the air district, they'll say that's not our responsibility, that's more Dtsc or the water agencies, and vice versa. So I guess my question is, are you guys putting on your radar the need to do more than just regulate? Because for me as a community person and a frontline and on I am that blast zone community where we get directly hit by stationary sources, refineries that blow up, spewing stuff into the air that drops into the water. What is your focus on doing prevention and elimination as opposed to just regulating or watching? Because when I hear regulate, I don't hear that you're preventing the contamination from happening. I hear we're just going to continue to monitor and watch it happen. And that is of high concern for me, because part of my job is burying my family, my friends, my neighbors. And at some point, we can no longer take a watch or a regulate approach that does nothing to eliminate or prevent the contamination in these areas. There's got to be something in place that says these are impacted areas. And we know that because you have the AB 617, we're considered care groups, we're on the Enviro screen, Enviro score, Geo tracker, you name it. Thanks to technology, we now at the hit of a key can zero in on a particular address and community and be able to identify where these toxic sources exist. So as I want to engage in this process, I don't want to waste my time I wanted to actually reduce or prevent or eliminate the threat to my community's health. So I know it's a whole lot in there. And if you guys are unclear about what I'm asking, bottom line is I want to see pollution eliminated or prevented. And if you do find it, let's eliminate it, not just reduce it. Thank you.
Thanks, Ladonna. I had a comment on that. Just want to add a quick comment. In one of the slides, we talk about not just our regulation, not just air toxic control measures to regulate air toxins, but we also offer a bunch of different suggestions in ways that we look at air toxics as well, even suggested control measures, but also the impact of tracking these pollutants. We have an extensive emissions inventory program that has just been recently updated to include more toxics, to reach out to more facilities to report all their emissions. And that's one part of the tracking that we are actively engaged in here in TTD and at the board as well, to track where these pollutants are located. We also talk about situations where we look at the 617 communities, the monitoring programs, those types of things. So we're aware of what's going on within a lot of the communities, at least from the data that we have. And we're actively engaged with those communities in 617, but also from our level, we're looking at those sources as well as being the sources that we can potentially look to not just control measures, but look to maybe even provide different ways, suggest different ways to mitigate emissions from these sources. We have an active program where we look at the projects that are being built under CEQA, in which we look at the projects and we make recommendations and help even the decision makers at the local jurisdiction level make informed decisions about how they can reduce these emissions, and even go so far as to prevent some of these emissions by using alternatives, substitute compounds, those types of things. So we're just getting started, but we understand there's more to do in this area. But thanks, a good comment.
And this is Rich. Let me just add one quick thing, because Ladonna, if I understand you correctly, I think what you're what you're saying is you're done. You're past the point of talking about the problem, studying the problem, analyzing the problem. What you want to see is the problem taken care of. And when we're talking about control measures and things like that, that is that mechanism to do that, to not just reduce pollution, but we are mindful and looking for ways to actually eliminate it. And so, for example, one of the things that's going on with our chrome plating ATCM, we are very well, earnestly looking at, the possibility of moving the industry from, hexavalent chrome, toxic compound, into another alternative that still allows them to do chrome plating, but removes a pollution source, or at least reduces it to the extent that we can. So I think that's what you were trying to communicate with. I just want to make sure that I was understanding what your actual concern was, and just to make sure that I understand what you're asking. Okay, Ugo.
Oh, okay.
Oh, wait, did you have a follow-up, Ladonna? By all means.
Well, no, you did touch on what I was referring to. Yes, we need more than just talking about it. We need some action, but also, being able to, because, okay, so my understanding is the local air districts are stationary sources and Carb is mobile sources, or is it the other way around? I forget who has a jurisdiction over who, but at the end of the day, Carb oversees air pollution and air health for communities. And so the example I was given, or that I gave, is the fact that we have 5 dead whales in less than a month. That is clearly telling us there's a major problem going on. And so we got to do more than just regulate. We've got to prevent these things from happening. So that's done through permitting, through, like you said, identifying these sources and things like that. But Carb cannot continue to allow processes either where you already know we're in disadvantaged communities. For instance, those wells are being found in the areas where these there was also current toxic spills that happened. A couple of them from Chevron over there in Richmond, and then further down closer to me where we are, but just a few miles down between Rodeo and South Vallejo, we had the Phillips 66 release into the air that of course drops down into the water. And so again, we want to hear that focus, which is, I guess, what you guys are talking about, doing more than just regulating. You're looking at ways to prevent or eliminate. So, we're going to hold you to it, and we're going to stay on y'all about it. But we have to look more from an angle of prevention, elimination and prevention, as opposed to watching something happen through regulation. Thank you.
And this is Heather Arias. I'm the division chief, and this is my team that's put this together. Good to see you again tonight, Ladonna. Thank you for joining us. And I think that there's a really important point that you're bringing up that I don't want to be overshadowed, which is a couple of things. One, I appreciate your comment about essentially don't be pointing fingers back at each other, right? Don't put the blame back on the air district and then the air district point the finger back at us. Be your ally, work with you, and be your partner in this process. And I appreciate that, and I hear you. And I do understand even the previous commenter with the frustration of essentially pass the buck, right? You're told by a lot of different folks that that's not us. So as Carb, what I'm hearing is we need to do a better job of helping to be your partner and connecting with the right folks, not just saying that's not our problem. I also appreciate your advocacy for your community on asking us and pushing on us. And I think that specifically since we're talking about the reg process tonight, I would really encourage you all to continue to communicate that message to us all the way through. I appreciate you coming tonight and your participation at these meetings and workshops and even our board meeting. To be very clear with all of us what you want is extremely helpful through the process. And the more that you can remind us of that and be adamant of what you need, that's really very helpful. So thank you for that.
And feel free to hold our feet to the fire.
Thank you, Ladonna. Okay, so next up we have a Jay Corral. I apologize if I pronounced your last name incorrectly. I also saw that you had a couple questions in the chat, so I'll go ahead and unmute you and feel free to ask your questions.
Hello, everyone. My name is Juan Corral. I'm from the Northeast Los Angeles area. And I just want to piggyback on what Rachel stated earlier about the project of Rumfield sites at besides the river, the Taylor Yard, G2 and the bow tie. My question is this, because it is a brownfield site, we know that it's full of lead and arsenic. We do have schools that are less than 500 feet from the actual sites. When does the Carb get involved? When Dtsc for the last 2 years has been notified that there's an air quality issue? So my understanding, if you can actually explain to me really quick, is when somebody like Dtsc that's in charge of honoring a brownfield site, when the community has raised issues with Dtsc regarding that, who is responsible to communicate with Carb? Is it the community itself or Dtsc that's overseeing the site? Because that's something that I want to make sure that I leave together with a clear understanding how that works. And another thing too is the 1-800 number that you guys have is not working. Most of the time when we call to report these construction site, the first thing they ask us is it happening right there on the spot, right when you're calling. Most of us work. If I call this number, is because I'm calling after hours. So technically speaking, if I say that I'm not actually seeing them right in front of me and calling them while I can see the dust being created, they usually do not follow up. And I've made a few calls already regarding that site, and they keep on telling me that if it's not occurring, they can't go and cite the polluter. Because it is a DTSC DTSC project. Wouldn't it be wise for DTSC to automatically connect with Carb when there's any potential fugitive dust, in particular matter coming from locations that are like a brownfield site? So that's my question. If you guys can kind of just give me a clarity how that works.
This is Lynn Baker. I can respond to that. Normally, DTSC would coordinate that type of an issue with the local air district. So in your case, that would be with the South Coast Air Quality Management District. All the local air districts have rules regarding blowing dust. So in terms of how much dust could be allowed to be exposed and to blow around, that would be the DTSC would need to coordinate that with the local air district.
Yeah, they technically have actually told every individual in the meetings, when we do have meetings with DTSC, to make sure that we call that 1-800 number. Beyond that, we haven't had any connection or link with any other board that can actually give us some guidance on how to deal with that, with the air quality issue from that site, from the brownfield site. Is there any number that I can call to make a formal complaint or get this rolling? Because this is something serious. Like I said, we do have 3 schools that are less than 500 feet from the actual site, and they're intermittently creating dust. It's actually traveling onto the school sites.
Yeah, this is Rich. Let me make a recommendation. Can you go ahead and provide your contact information to Amanda directly?
Okay.
Because I think there's some additional details, one that we're going to need to get, and then we can see how we can help facilitate this process for you.
Okay. Amanda Anders?
Amanda Anderson, yes.
Yes.
So you just drop your contact information there, and that way it'll go directly to her, and you won't be broadcasting it throughout the entire call, and then we'll follow up with you directly on that one.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks so much for that, Juan. I wanted to go over to the chat now to give some folks who've asked questions there a chance to have their questions addressed. Juan, I do see you do still have a couple questions in the chat. So did you want me to still go ahead and read those?
Yes, please, because I think that a lot of community members would like to know how to request air monitors. Usually they tell us to request them. So if you guys have like a program that we can reach out to get those air monitors, that would be great.
Okay, sure. And you were cutting out just a little bit for me, but so I'll just repeat that question as it was in the chat. So the question was, how does a community request air monitors?
Yeah, I mean, I talked about the air monitorings before, and I think some of those communities definitely those communities that are in 617 communities in the process to request air monitors from the air districts themselves, and for the steering committee as well can be requested air monitoring. I think that you can always make the request to the air districts if they have monitoring, that is. I know South Coast does, Bay Area does, but you can also make those requests to Carb as well. You can make a request to us, and we can look and see what we can do to help you out in situations where we might have monitoring already going on in your area. We can look and see if there's a possibility that we can have some monitoring, mobile monitoring, those types of things. We certainly can take the request, and if we have the resources that we can do to put into this, that's something that can be made directly to the local air districts, but also can be made to us as well.
Great, thank you so much for that. I'm just trying to scan through the chat here really quickly, see if there are any other questions that I missed. There was a question, oh, I think actually Amanda addressed it in the chat about if there was a page identifying existing and or proposed working groups. And I believe that once Amanda had shared a link, and once you navigate to the website, I believe that that website has a list of all the listservs and topics on that website as well. Okay, so our next question is from Jane Williams, and her question is, what can Carb do to prevent the release of persistent bioaccumulative, toxic chemicals into our communities? Does Carb have a plan to move the zero release of these highly persistent chemicals into the air? So
I can go ahead and try and answer that question. Thanks, Jane, for that question. And I understand this is something that that has been discussed before in some of our work group meetings in the past. And some of those things I want to mention that we do have an interagency working group that involves most all of the Cal EPA BDOs or agencies such as Water Board, Dtsc, Cal Recycle, and I said Dtsc, DPR, where we are looking at, that's the very issue that we're looking at. We're looking at these perfluoro alkyl compounds, these PFAS compounds, and their effects, bioaccumulative effects on the public in California. And some of those things that we've been addressed is looking at the toxicity from each one of these compounds. OEA, the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, has been reviewing many of these compounds and is in the process of developing new health values for many of these compounds as well. And we understand the issues, the bioaccumulation issues, and especially from the water side of things. Carb is keeping track of what's been going on. We are looking at ways where, for example, ways that we can reduce these toxic compounds, these bioaccumulative compounds, in the things that we do. In many of our regulations, we look at ways where we can have not only the benefits from the toxic air contaminants that we've identified as toxic air contaminants under law, but we're also looking at ways that maybe if we, by reducing some of the compounds that we're working on in our regulations, such as chrome plating and the fume suppressants, which maybe I think addresses some of your next question, that when we do a regulation such as the transition to a process that doesn't use those fume suppressants, we kind of not only benefit the public from the reduction in toxic emissions, but we also reduce the impact of the PFAS chemicals to not only the potential air emissions, but also to the discharging into the water system, in the drinking water, in the groundwater, and so on. So those kinds of things are what we're doing. That's an active working group that we meet every few weeks to discuss these things, to develop different regulations, not regulations, but different action measures that we can take to do these. And I know Water Board's actively involved. Dtsc, Safer Consumer Products Program, is actively involved in looking at reducing and eliminating a lot of these PFAS chemicals. And we are trying to look at this as well to keep actively engaged in the process where if there's a potential where we can reduce these from the air impact side of things, as well as other media, we will do that certainly.
And this is Rich. Let me add one thing, and we're certainly happy to set up additional discussions with you or anybody else who would like to to weigh in on this. But this is something that we've been talking about internally, and quite frankly, we don't have like all the answers yet, and so this is a good time to kind of weigh in on that. But part of it is, how do we deal with that concept of regrettable substitution, where you have a lot of these compounds that are out there. As Robert was saying, we don't know a whole lot about a lot of these compounds before they're used, and I think we're all aware that a lot of times the manufacturer of these compounds don't necessarily do what we would call the necessary due diligence to understand what some of those broader health implications might be from use, of those compounds. And so it's what sort of process changes might we need to consider to the air toxics program to allow some of that to happen before it gets too far out and ahead of us, and we're trying to to play catch up. And like I said, we don't have definitive answers to that, but it is something that we're trying to figure out. And so we're definitely interested in what thoughts and ideas that others may have on that.
Great, thanks guys. So I am actually going to kick it over to see if we have any questions on the phone lines now before we get back to the raised hands.
La línea telefónica. We haven't had any person asking questions in the phone line so far.
Okay, thanks so much. That's on the Spanish line. Do we have anybody who called in to the Zoom meeting in English and we know there's a problem sometimes with raising your hand. So if there's anybody who called into the Zoom meeting on the English line and is not able to raise your hand and you want to speak, please unmute yourself. You can press *6 to mute yourself and go ahead and ask your question. If there's anybody on the line that does have a question. Give it a minute or so just to see if anybody wants to speak. Alrighty, hearing nothing, we'll come back to the phone lines if there's anybody, so we will still have a chance to ask questions later on, but I'll go back to the hands, and the next hand we have is Richard Sadowsky. So I will unmute you and please go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity here. I'm from Homefront Environmental Justice Morro Bay, and our focus with environmental justice is on citizen science. And I just have a couple comments. I want to kind of bounce what I think it was Miss Williams was saying from Los Angeles. And we need to do more than regulate. We need to start collaborating. We need to start innovating. One of the things that I heard is one of the questions about, or a comment about the AB 617. Our group had applied through our fiscal sponsor, Ecologistics, for that AB 617 to monitor carbon dioxide around the Morro Bay estuary. And we were unsuccessful in getting that Carb grant. However, we were successful in getting the community city grant to get an handheld air monitoring device. And we were able to start the Morro Bay estuary air monitoring project last year. And so we've collected about a year's worth of carbon dioxide data around the Morro Bay estuary. And about halfway through the project, we started collaborating with the Cal Poly University on their study of ocean acidification. And what I feel is that we need to have Carb almost as a nexus of collaboration, because the air has no boundaries. And we have to recognize that if we're going to address the climate change, and we're going to lace in AB 32 with greenhouse gases, we need to start monitoring those. And I feel the best way that Carb can help is help facilitate job creation through grant programs for citizen science and air monitoring. For instance, those Mr. Correll, what I feel that's coming from him is he's doing this for his kids. You got schools around there. So, why don't we lace in studies? Why don't we have more of that kind of opportunity? And I think that's where the key lies, or we could start integrating citizen science and Carb and water boards, and just bringing it all together as a community. That's it.
Apologize, I was on mute there. Thank you so much for that comment, Richard. Okay, moving on to our next hand, we have Lonnie is next up. I will unmute you, and please go ahead and speak.
I don't want to go ahead of my time. I think Rachel, her hand was up before mine, and so I don't want to go before her. So I can go next because she was before me.
Yes, she was actually. Thank you for that, Lonnie. I did want to give you a chance to speak. We had heard from Rachel a little bit earlier, and I wanted to give you a chance to speak and have Rachel follow up after you. But either way, Rachel can go now as well if you prefer. That's completely fine.
Yes, that's no problem.
Sure. Okay, Rachel, go ahead. I'm going to unmute you.
Lonnie, thank you very much. That was very gentlemanly of you. Yeah, okay, so the second batter up. In the Echo Park area, Westlake area of Los Angeles, there has been very public, it's very public knowledge that there are a number, probably hundreds of uncapped oil wells that are leaking some level of methane and probably other hydrocarbons, but methane was the main one that I heard of. We know that a methane molecule can damage our atmosphere. I forget, what is it, 10 or 50 times worse than CO2. Not only that, it endangers the safety and health and well-being of my constituents. And so is Echo Park and this area of town on your all's radar? And if not, how do I get you all down here? Because I'm not only interested in monitoring and seeing, what the levels are, but I would really like to speak to you all about what we can do to cap these. I did have a meeting with Food and Water Watch at the beginning of the year. They said that the problem is that when you cap one side of the reservoir, all the gas goes out the other end, and so it's not a simple issue. But I do want to try to talk to experts about what we can do to cap these wells. And whether or not some sort of cap, if we cap most of them and then we capture the methane coming out of the rest of the holes, can we use I read about a bacteria that breaks down methane, can we, capture and actually contain the methane so that it's not released into the atmosphere.
Hi, Rachel. This is Rich. I think this is another one where if we could get your contact information, I think we need to check into a few things, but it might be some folks in our industrial strategies division that we need to have reach out to you. But I want to double check on that and make sure that we're connecting you with the right person. So if you could give me your contact information to Amanda, we'll check into that and then follow up with you.
Amanda has my contact information. And
oh, you have it? Okay. All right.
Would you say industrial what?
A strategies division.
Industrial strategies division. I just want to make a note. Thank you so much. I look forward to hearing from you all on that matter as well. Lonnie, you're up.
Thanks so much, Rachel. Go ahead, Lonnie.
All righty. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. And thank you for the process. My name is Lonnie. actually Executive Director of First Generation Environmental Health and Economic Development in the Bayview Hunters Point community. We have a crisis situation right now in the community, and it's dealing with the concrete plant. For something like 20 years, this plant has been operating without a permit. And there's sand dunes that goes up to at least 2 to 3 story high, has been undetected for that long. And not only that, what's going on and what's happening is that we have a homeless shelter right in the midst of that. And when I say crisis, this is a immediate situation where we need the assistance of Carb when it comes to funding and being able to monitor that site, because that's, how can I say, that's a travesty to go 20 years without having a permit. And not only that, to expose those individuals in that homeless shelter of those dust particles for, I think they've been there for over a year. And so this is a situation that needs to be addressed. And I just want to know how Carb, when it comes to the Air District, how can you assist in this process and helping our community get the assistance, the necessary funding to jump on a situation right now? Thank you.
I think, Lonnie, I can take a shot at that, but I think we need to have, like Rich mentioned, we need to have your contact number and your name, and so we can look into this a little bit further. The concrete plant that you mentioned about the permits are not being permitted for over 20 years. That's something that we would have to look into with the Bay Area Air Quality Management District to see what has happened there and what is going on with that situation, and something that we can look into a little further, because I know under our program, under a hotspots program, many of those facilities are required to report their emissions, but also to maybe even conduct a health risk assessment. So that's something that we can definitely tag on to and look into this for you. So if you could provide the name in there, I wrote your question down, so I know what you're looking for. And we can look into that and get back to you.
Great, thanks, Robert. Okay, going back over to the chat now, we have some more questions. The first one is from Robina, and her question is, what specific protocols and rules does Carb have in place to regulate the surfactants used in the chrome plating process?
Okay, I can address that one as well too. Our section's working on the chrome plating amendments to our airborne toxic control measure. Within that airborne toxic control measure, our primary goal when we adopted this measure back in 2008, or at least the amended measure in 2008, was to reduce hex chrome from these facilities and those emissions that are located in communities. So in doing so, one of the processes to reduce these emissions is we had the facilities use the fume suppressants. And at that time, there were fume suppressants. They were PFOS containing fume suppressants, and that reduced the chrome emissions quite a bit, significantly. Well, since that time, we've learned out a lot more about PFOS and PFOS contaminants. EPA did as well. They banned the PFOS fume suppressants, and we in turn recertified the fume suppressants for use from these facilities in California to have non-PFOS containing fume suppressants. Well, it turned out that even those non-PFOS containing fume suppressants contained PFAS chemicals. And so what we're doing through the adoption of maybe even more stringent rules or looking towards alternatives such as the trivalent chrome plating, that process in itself, as I mentioned before, will effectively just eliminate all the PFAS containing fume suppressants from that process. We are also looking into the process where alternatives can be used in let's say plating processes, which such as even mechanical devices, mechanical control measures such as the polyballs and those types of things that can be used as part of a process to reduce hex chrome emissions and basically eliminating the use of the PFAS fume suppressants within these facilities. So there are a number of options that we're looking into, and even in our amendments where even though we don't have that direct authority to control PFAS substances from the state level because they're not listed as a toxic air contaminant, we can effectively reduce these emissions through our actions within our regulations, where we can use substitute compounds and those types of things that we can require as a measure to reduce hex chrome.
Thank you for that, Robert. Our next comment we have up in the chat is from Greg San Martin. So this is kind of a long question, so I will maybe read it twice or read it into pieces. Let me know what you guys need. So the first part, so does the new version of CalEnviroScreen include emissions from jet fuel use associated with landing and takeoff activities at Oakland International? The Bay Area Board issued a report last year identifying LTO jet fuel use associated with Oakland International and SF International. Oakland, for example, has 330,000 tons of CO2 emissions from LTO jet fuel use, which are very much like diesel particulate in terms of health impacts. If not, how long before these emissions are incorporated into CalEnviroScreen? So again, the first question there was, does the new version of CalEnviroScreen include emissions from jet fuel use associated with landing and takeoff activities at Oakland International? And if not, how long before those emissions are incorporated into CalEnviroScreen?
I could try to take this question.
Yes,
So the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment actually manages the CalEnviroScreen tool. So for this one, we'll probably need to, again, get your contact information. We can connect you to some folks at OWIHA who are familiar with, what the next version will look like, if jet fuel will be considered for potential future rounds of the tool. So maybe we could get that and then connect you with the OWIHA folks if that works.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Michelle. Next up, we have a question from, or comment/question from Jane Williams. And so she says, okay, hey, here's one thing I want. Can you stop using secrecy agreements with polluters to hide information from the public? These confidential business information agreements need to be stopped. Is this something we can expect the agency to end soon now that it has committed to environmental justice? And there's also a second part of that goes on to say, the South Coast AQMD has a special rule on dust from construction and contaminated sites. Call 1-800 cut smog, or sorry, call 1-800 cut smog, or even better, get the cell phone number of the regional inspector for the South Coast AQMD and call them every time you see dust. Stay on them. And I think that second part might have been replying to an earlier question as well, but the top part of that is the original question about secrecy agreements will those be ended soon now that we have a new commitment to environmental justice?
So this is Rich, I mean, we don't have, secrecy agreements. I think what's being referred to are, confidential business information. And, there are requirements in state law that require us to take reasonable efforts to protect that. And so that's not something that's coming from us. That's something that's said by the, by the legislature. However, we do, try to be as transparent with information, where we can, but we do have to follow the law there. And so a lot of times, we'll try to reach out to the people who have protected the information to see what can be released, what can't be released, but we're limited to what we can do there. It's just a function of law.
Okay, great. So I am we'll do one more question from the comments, and then I'll kick it over to, we'll check in with the phone lines again to see if we have any questions there. So the next question was from, is from Richard Sadowsky. And it was, and this might be something that was addressed earlier, but I'll go ahead and read it anyway. How can Carb promote citizen science as a job creator? Do we have anyone who can provide a response for that one, who might want to take that on the Carb side? Again, the question was, how can Carb promote citizen science as a job creator?
Yeah, I can take a shot at that one. That's an interesting comment. Thank you. That's I think the process when we look at areas where the communities are impacted, and we look at programs where we can incentivize, from our standpoint, incentivize the process, mitigation process, things that would help us, address some of the air toxics and the air community pollution problems. I think one of those areas that we often look at, and I know we do this in our regulations, but often maybe in some of these other areas where we can probably look at a little more, expand our knowledge, is in the areas where we not only provide the incentives to many of these citizen projects, but in doing so, that would, if you get the funding for doing some of these projects, that funding is kind of a natural fit to increase the citizen job opportunities that are happening within your communities and those types of things. But that's a very interesting question, and we'll think a little bit more on that in the future. But I think by inherently providing incentives through our different programs, like as I mentioned this before, like through 617 or some of the other funding projects, even Prop B and those types of things, where we're funding the purchase of cleaner equipment or mitigation strategies that can reduce emissions. That in turn puts money into the communities themselves, if it not be for replacing technologies and equipment, but also for even the promoting of the jobs. I mean, we go about this a different way, but promoting jobs that can be created because of the increase in the money going to the communities and the groups, and even the processes and the equipments, the purchase, and those types of things, because you'll have to have people that work on those things. You have to have the installers, you have to have the people within your communities that can do these things. So that in some way can promote it. But that's a very interesting question. We will consider that and continue moving forward. It's a very valuable comment. Thank you.
Okay, I want to go ahead and swing over to the phone lines now to see if there's anybody, if we have any questions. Are there any questions on the Spanish line?
No, not at the moment. Nada en español. Gracias.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Julie. how about I'll give a minute or so for folks who called in to the Zoom on the English line. If you have had issues raising your hand, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question. You can unmute yourself by selecting *6.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, my name is Marta Jimenez. I sit on the AB 6117 Advisory Council and also at the Community Development. I am very industrial corridor that's nested in the 90063 zip code. We have hundreds of operators being emanating from there. I wanted to know if there's a way that Carb implements a mitigation process on the industrial corridors so we can be protected from the highly polluted toxicity that floats every single day. We have a lot of cancer clusters already identified within the area. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for that question. I'm going to ask you, would you mind repeating the first part of your question? It was cutting out it was cutting out a bit at the first half of your question. If you wouldn't mind just repeating that for us.
Yes, I would like to find out what implementation measures and mitigation or strategies can your regulating entity put in place at the City Terrace Industrial Corridor, which is nested in the unincorporated area of Los Angeles County, 90063. There's just so many corporations that are polluting our environment, and we don't even know what kind of chemicals. And also, I would like to find out if Carb has the authority to do something about the airplanes that are traveling so low in our neighborhood. The noise is exasperating, and the size of the planes, you could see them as if they're about to crash with trees if you're in a park. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question. Is there anyone from Carb on the line that would like to respond to that? So what we might do, it sounds like if we could, I know that you're on the phone line right now, so you can't leave your information in the chat. Can we, I do see your phone number here. Can we maybe follow up with you afterwards at this number to try to get some more information on your situation? Okay,
yes,
great.
Of course.
Okay.
And there's over 55,000 residents affected by those situations that I addressed. Thank you.
Sure. And I'm sorry, could you repeat your name for me one more time as well?
Yes, Marta Jimenez.
Marta Jimenez. Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All righty, do we have anybody else on the phone line who would like to unmute themselves and ask a question? If so, you can unmute yourself by selecting *6. Okay, hearing nothing. I'm going to circle back actually to the chat just before I get back to the raised hands. We had a follow-up question earlier from Robina, and on following up on her question about chrome plating and what we were doing to address it. And so her follow-up comment was, I understand the transition will assist in reducing emissions from surfactants, but what are we doing now? And so I wanted to mention that and give folks a chance to, if anyone wanted to respond to that. Otherwise, we can also follow up with her afterwards if that's something that would be easier for us to do.
Yeah, I can mention a few things now. I mean, what we're doing now is you know, when we're talking about the PFAS compounds and the surface surfactants, and the fume suppressants, that sort of thing. We're doing now. We're working in a working group, like I mentioned before, with the PFAS, developing health numbers. OES developing health numbers for those things, because as one of the main requirements that we have to do is obviously not just reduce the emissions, but reduce the emissions of those compounds that have some health impacts and those types of things. So that's one of the things that we're doing right now. The other thing that we're doing now is we're actively engaged in the process, like you mentioned, Robina, that we're amending our regulation. And so I guess what we're saying is we're not doing this today right now, but we're actively in the process of movement as quickly as we can under a regulatory process to look at ways where we can reduce not just the chrome from the process, but look at the ways that we can reduce these fume suppressants and in their environmental footprint, those types of things. That's something that we're taking very seriously as well. We've actually worked with South Coast in some of the source testing to find out the air emissions from some of these PFAS compounds as well. So that's something that we have done, and we are actively looking at that. So that's how we can address what we know now. And if we find out more, determined with some of the work with our other agencies, I can certainly let you know about that.
Okay, thanks so much, Robert. Robina, I wanted to give you a chance to follow up, and just to make sure we fully answered your question this time, I am going to unmute you if you want to go ahead and speak. If not, that's fine too, but I just wanted to make sure that we addressed your comments and your questions. Robina, are you there? Okay. Well, definitely, if there are, if you want to speak again later, please do go ahead and raise your hand, or you can enter anything in the chat. Oh, okay. She did put something in the chat that her connection is a little bit unstable, but I believe we did answer her questions. Okay, thank you so much, Rubina. Okay, so to kick it back to the raised hands, we have Ladonna.
Okay, can you hear me? Oh,
Yes,
there I am. Okay. And I might have to do like Lonnie, unless Moses' hand just he meant to raise it down. He's had his hand up for quite some time, and I know I raised my hand after him, after the other folks. So did he go already?
He did not. It is showing up on my list reversed with you before him, but that's completely fine. We can have Moses go ahead and speak.
Yeah, because he's been waiting for quite some time, and I can go after him.
Sure. Thank you so much for that. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Lara. But actually, you were ahead of me. So, ladies first, if you'd like to go ahead, I want to, definitely, please go right ahead.
Either way is fine. Okay.
You're muted, Ladonna.
I was gonna say, I keep tapping and it was going back and forth. So, okay. Well, thank you, Moses. We've been talking so long now. I don't know if we're on a particular subject or we're just able to kind of bring out what our concerns are.
Feel free.
Yep.
Okay. So I wanted to raise the issue about funding. I know, folks have been talking about the issues in their communities, and, Carb missed in my humble opinion, they missed a huge opportunity to really support community further through this COVID process. Grants were supposed to come out last year. They didn't. We were told it was going to come out the beginning of this year. And I have, recently communicated with staff who says that they will be released sometime in the summer. But by the time they do that, the next round of grants, from my understanding, are due. Like, our communities have been devastated by this epidemic. Compounded are the issues that before COVID, during, and even now, we're having to deal with these issues. We all know it takes funding to do this. And so I'm wondering, what is the holdup with the funding? Why, are we given these dates? It's going to be out any day in a couple of weeks. And every time we ask, it's further down the road. You already missed that opportunity to really support communities. What is happening?
So we do have somebody here from with our funding group, Trish. I don't know if you're able to provide a little insight on that question.
Sure. Thank you very much, Rich. So I am communicating with Ladonna about the AB 617 community air grants. And if I'm correct, Ladonna, that would be the grants. So the Carb EJ team did in fact get $10 million as a part of the 2019 Budget Act that has yet to be released to the public. And while there was no funding provided for 2020 with the pandemic, in the governor's January proposal, there is another $10 million that we're waiting for the May revise to come out to see what's in that, and then ultimately what's decided by the legislature. However, Ladonna is correct that with the timing of the release of the next solicitation, it is hovering very closely to potentially having, another 10 million to solicit out for. So with the transition of some staff at Carb, it was definitely a challenge. And Chanel Fletcher, who's our new Deputy Executive Officer for Environmental Justice, recognizes that this is way behind and has to be a high priority. She did set a target for us to release them the first half of this year. And our immediate target is to put out a timeline that we will meet and we will not miss. So I plan to provide that to you directly, Ladonna, as soon as it's ready. And I am very sorry for all the time that has passed without providing the funding.
Thanks so much, Trish. Okay.
And I wasn't certain if Ladonna was speaking, but she was muted. I can't tell.
Oh, okay. Ladonna, did you? I think I need to ask you to unmute. Okay, go for it. Did you want to follow up and add anything, Ladonna?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
So is it only AB 617 that provides the EJ funding? Are there other areas that the community could be supported in? For instance, some of our communities are addressing or kind of fairly new to the process as far as grants and engagement with the railroads. Are all of these under, if we fall into what is considered the mapping of care communities, AB 617, depending on what agency, we're labeled different things, but clearly the common denominator we're frontline, severely disadvantaged communities. Is it just only through AB 617 that this funding, is available? Shouldn't it be through other processes? And if so, we'd like to see there be more of a supportive effort to get that funding to, the communities, especially those like Rodale and other areas that are not at the table, not getting any support at all, because we do know that there are certain communities, and we have yet to see that they're Black communities, But we've had other non-Black communities tell us they knew nothing about environmental justice. They knew nothing about engagement. Yet Carb made it a point, or the Air District made it a point to seek them out and to help give them funding from whatever source it is. We need that same thing to happen in African American communities that are struggling and literally dying.
Thank you for that, Ladonna. So you're right that I should be careful about the words that I use, because I had referred to AB 617. However, in my head, I was thinking that it was the pot of funding. So the funding that the legislature approves for the program, it does include, back in 2019, it included 10 million for community air grants. We hope it will do the same this summer. And the thing about the program that we administer, so we were given those pot of funds to distribute to communities directly, is that we are not tied to just the selected communities. There's 15 in the state right now that have been selected for a community emissions reduction program or community air monitoring, or both. And by even air monitoring, I'm really referring to regulatory, what Carb and the Air Districts do, but we're not tied to those communities. So, fortunately, we were able to provide some funding to Vallejo, and Chanel does recognize the priority to reach communities like Rodeo, Salton City, Lavinia. These are communities that are not selected for the AB 617 regulatory program, but are definitely worthy of some attention as soon as possible. So that has also been a priority to Chanel, and thank you for helping me clarify that.
Great, thank you. Okay, moving on to the next hand, we have Moses.
Thank you, everyone. Good evening, everyone. My name is Moses Huerta. I'm a community member here in the city of Paramount. Thank you for the invitation to speak with this in this meeting. I did want to ask, am I able to share a link with the team or everyone to reference and what I'm about to say? Is that okay? It is a regular week. It's referencing to something that referencing to what I like to see from Carb, and speaking from more of a community standpoint. What I sent in the link is just what I think is truly is a case study in what I'd like not us first to see in enforcement and also taking action into companies. There's a company in Detroit that was an identified gross polluter. They were identified, they were fined, they were consistently banned after by the regulatory agencies, local, Department of Health, EPA. They went on and checking on this company. So much so that just in the beginning of last year, they were finally shut down. They were fined. The owners of the company were sent to prison. But that whole process took 20 years. 20 years of this company that was actually continually, knowingly dumping hexavalent chromium, cyanide, trichloroethylene, I believe it's called, under its building. The owner itself dug a pit under his company to store this stuff and dumped it. It didn't come to light until it started seeping out into the water, into the ground, and obviously into the air. So I want to know, referencing back into the presentation of enforcement, and I'd like to see mention that we can't get to that point where it shouldn't take that long, where the agencies need to have the collaboration and more of a proactive enforcement, getting to not get to that point. Now that might be an extreme example, but to share that with the team that we don't want to be there. We want to stop this before it actually starts harming the community. This facility was actually a block away from a neighborhood, from families and kids, so it was affecting them. Now I want to bring it back down to where we're at here in California, especially specifically to my hometown. It's been now 5 years into the process here where hexavalent chromium was caught in the air. The AQMD came out, a lot of the regulatory agencies came out and identified. A lot of hard work was placed into identifying, enforcing, and actually bringing the community up to speed and understanding what's going on. We're now in the 5th year, and we are not, we seem kind of like it's gotten set off to the wayside. Now, I will grant you, we had the COVID going on. And so I totally understand what we're trying to figure out what we need to do there. But I live in about 200 yards away from 2 metal forgeries. There is no monitoring going on with them now, even though there is a regulatory monitor at the end of my street. So in the enforcement part, if there is gaps, not only in the local community, but in the regulatory, seeing Carb maybe having, I'd like to see the proactivity monitoring. Is this, if we have the hardware, the equipment out there, is it being used? That's a lot of expensive equipment just sitting there collecting dust, where it should be used and continually keeping the eye on, even in extraneous situations, for example, the COVID that we had. I'm also sharing a couple of pictures just for give you kind of a reference as well to the team. So again, the monitor's been sitting there. Even my local city purchased monitors, but they've had them in storage. So again, I don't know how we can start a mechanism, and maybe if with the carbon and you know in the enforcement and being a proactive that I like to see, knowing that if this hardware is out there, as we spoke about now, and the monitoring, people speak about that a lot. If we already have it, you know, let's stay on top of it. Let's make sure it's functioning. Let's make sure it's still providing that spotlight that there was a reason why they were put out there. We need to keep that spotlight and see if it's still working. If the companies are doing their due diligence and they're doing their work and they've been helped to do better, then that's our check. So I think in this is what I like to see is that we streamline or identify where we have those barriers from in the top level, as I like to see from Carb, from top level down. Where is the barriers in the communication? I don't want to see what happened in that example in Detroit, where it took 20 years, where one agency thought, oh, I thought you were doing it. Oh, I thought you were doing it. Why aren't we enforcing more? Why isn't there communication? Where literally, from my, if you'll see in that reference, it was 2 swimming pools full of contamination. 2 swimming pools full of contaminant that this guy dug under his place. We don't want to get there. Back to my community here, I can tell you, we just recently saw that there was some PFAS already seen in one of our water wells. Luckily, there's been proactivity to reference that and address it. But from the car standpoint, especially in air quality monitoring from here, I know that the AB 617 is ramping up, but that's going to be a slow, and the community identifying and working, which I think is an amazing thing to be supported. But again, referencing to, again, the enforcement and to the subject that we were talking about here in the car, what can we do? And I'd like to see that where if we already have processes in place, recheck them, enhance them, streamline them to make sure we stay ahead of the curve in these issues versus of the issues as my fellow community members and others on this cause have mentioned, where we're kind of reacting. Hopefully the items that went through okay, and I apologize if that wasn't appropriate, but I really appreciate you letting me share that with you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that link and the pictures with us. I was taking a look at them as they were coming through there, so I appreciate that.
Thanks so much, Moses. Okay, so we are coming up on our time, and we do need to kick it back for some final polling questions and things like that. But I do see that there are, I think I saw about 5 more comments in the chat, and that we're not going to be able to get to today. So one thing I wanted to ask is for folks, we do see your comments in the chat, and we will follow up with you. And if you could also drop your contact info in the chat, that would be great. And also something else that will help us get back to you. Just to recap real quick, I see questions from Jane, Gregson, Martin, Brom, Richard, and Ralph in the chat. And there might be a few others that I have missed, but if you folks would like, we'd like to follow up with you. So please do drop your contact info in the chat. And I would also like to indicate too that there were some responses as well coming on in the chat with some information about, you know, community monitoring and resources and things like that. So folks, please do look at the chat to just see if there were any follow-up comments from anyone else addressing your question. Okay, great. Well, with that, I will go ahead and kick it back to Rich. And I do want to say, if there are any questions on the phone line too, apologize, please do follow up with us. We want to reach out to you and hear from you guys as well. So please do contact us. So with that, Rich, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, thanks, Hugo. So we do have a couple of final housekeeping items we want to go through, including a couple more quick slides. But before we do that, we have another poll we'd like folks to look at. So let's go ahead and throw up poll number 2. And and this poll is about where we always like to ask questions about basically how we're structuring these meetings, what platforms are working best for people. That's one of the questions. The types of meetings that work the best, whether we're talking about technical work group meetings, workshops, and things like that. And then we're always sensitive to when we're holding these meetings in terms of like the time of the day and whatnot, because we're always trying to maximize participation and to make sure things that that we're picking times that are such that most people can can attend. So if you can just take a minute or so just to drop your responses there in the in the poll, that'll be helpful to us. So I see some folks are starting to come in there, and it looks like I always like to give feedback as these things come in because I think it's pretty neat to see them as they come in. On the first question, it looks like one-on-one or small group meetings or conversations via Zoom, Teams, and whatnot is popular on that one, followed by webinars and in-person meetings, in the community. And on that, I would say in-person meetings in the community is something that we are certainly interested in being able to re-engage, once we get a little bit further in our recovery process with the pandemic. And so we're eager for that. Public meetings, so like workshops, technical work group meetings. One thing I like to mention, I think I may have mentioned this at a previous meeting, a lot of times when people see, working group meetings and they see that technical in front, the assumption that gets made is that those meetings are just for industry. And so I always like to clarify that is not the case. And so it is a public meeting and it's an opportunity for everybody to come in. It's just an indication that we're typically talking about specific issues, normally related to a specific rule that's being developed rather than having a broader type discussion. So it's just a moniker that we use to make that distinction. But everybody is absolutely welcome to participate in those meetings. So if you see it advertised as a technical working group meeting, yes, you can come in and participate, and we want you to come in and participate. And time of day, looks like the evening tends to work the best for most folks right now. Nobody wants to do it in the afternoon from 12 to 4. Duly noted. And then also I noticed on number 2, what public meetings there's, and also number 1, there's a couple of folks that said other. And so if you could just go ahead and drop in the chat what that other means, that'll give us an idea what you're thinking. It looks like there's still a few responses coming in, so we'll give it another few seconds and then we'll go ahead and kind of display those results so people can see them.
Do you want me to go ahead and end the poll?
Yeah, it looks like there's no more movement. All right, so we'll go ahead and end the poll and we'll just put the display up, the results up for a little bit, just so folks can just kind of take a look at the information that came in. So number 1, it was definitely the one-on-one meetings. Number 2, workshops. And then the evening is by far the winner there. Okay, with that, I'm going to pass the baton to Michelle Houghton for just a couple of follow-up slides, and then we'll move up into our wrap-up mode. Michelle?
All righty. This might take me a second or two to get right, but if I do this, it's going to not show you the right one. So I go like this and then stop And then go back here to share. There we go. All right. So we had a request to get more information on who does what at Carb. And so we made this slide to kind of give you an idea of the groups that are working on various pieces of the air toxics program. So almost every division is working on a piece of it. And then our final slide is how you can get more information or contact us. The first bullet is the air toxics program website, and it will give you background information on our program and regulations that are currently in the process of development. The second bullet is for the Gov delivery service. And here you can choose which regulations or subjects you are interested in, and you'll be added to the email list for those topics. The third bullet is if you would like to send us a question or request a meeting, use this email address here to ask us your question. And the final bullet, if you have any suggestions for improving community participation, please send us a note at this email address and we'll get back to you.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. And one thing to mention, we're sending out certificates of participation to any attendee who would want one. And the email address that was actually up to the air toxics email address, but we'll put it in the chat as well, is the email address where you can send, email us if you would like a certificate. And so when you send that request there, we'll collect all the folks who requested a certificate like we did last time, and then we'll go ahead and send it out directly to those folks. Just a couple of more wrap-up items. So there's just a quick little rundown of some, upcoming events. And so there's two that we want you to keep in mind right now. And so on Thursday, we do have our next working group meeting for the amendments to the chrome plating ATCM. That's from 1 to 4 p.m. This Thursday. And so if you didn't receive that invitation, you can reach out, to Robert, and we can get you, or any of us actually, even Amanda, and we can get you the Zoom information for that. It's going to be on Zoom. And then the other thing we just want to remind folks to keep on your calendar is our freight day. And so it's spread, we call it freight day, but it's actually spread over 2 days. And so that's June 8th and June 10th, both running from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. And we'll be having some more information coming out those over the next couple of weeks. So just kind of do a little save the date, for that. And then we have one last little poll, so really more of a survey. This is just information for us. So we appreciate if you would respond to that. And then certainly if, folks would like to stay around for a little bit, we'll hang around for just a little bit in case there's some final questions or something like that. We're available for a few minutes before we actually, terminate. So the survey's up there now. And so basically this helps us with our outreach and how we're notifying folks about the meeting and whatnot. So how did you hear about the listening session? And then basically just getting some thoughts from you about the meeting materials, which was the presentation and whatnot in the discussion, and what your thoughts are about it. And then I also wanted to direct everybody to question 4 when you get to it. And so this is where we like to get a sampling of the future topics that people are the most interested in, because we use this information to plan what's next. And so when I said earlier that this is you driven, this is how we do it. So it actually is you driven in terms of what we're going to talk about next. So if you can answer that one. And then, question 5 was talking about your preferred method to receive updates on the air toxics program. And then anytime you see like I'm trying to see if we can find one, like in question 5 and other, if you select other on anything, go ahead in the chat, just drop what that other means to you, just so we know what's on your mind in that regard. And so we'll go ahead and leave this up for a little bit, and then that'll put us around 7. We'll do a little formal close, and then, like I said, we'll stick around for a little bit afterwards in case there's some final commentary or trailing discussion that folks want to have. So I'm noticing on question 1 that it looks like most people heard about this from other Carb staff, and well, I guess other Carb staff and other are tied. So right now I'm not certain what the other is. And then on question 3, yeah, we just asked, very unlikely, likely, neutral, likely, very likely. If you're feeling comfortable, if you want to drop in the chat, or you can even set it to send it private to, to like Amanda on, some of the thoughts you had behind the responses that you selected, that'd be helpful to us. And then as far as future topics, it looks like cumulative impacts and control technologies, health risk assessment are leading the charge there. But pesticides are there, permit programs, commercial hovercraft is there, and we are working on amendments to NATCM on that, which is expected to go to the board this November. And then some BDO coordination. And enforcement. I didn't scroll that far enough. Enforcement. Question 5. Everybody selected email notifications via listservs. I don't know if I've ever seen that happen before. Everybody selects the same one there. Okay, we'll go ahead and leave that up for a few more seconds. But so while folks are just finishing their votes, I'd like to go ahead and thank everybody for joining us this evening. I just want to respect everybody's time, and so at this point we'll go ahead and formally close the meeting. But like I said, we'll hang around for a few minutes if there's any trailing comments or questions. And then, like Hugo mentioned, we didn't get to all the questions that were in the chat, but we will follow up with you to make sure that we get some responses to your questions and comments. And with that, I will wish everybody a good night. So I see Moses' hand up.
You are correct. His hand is up. Go ahead, Moses. Did you want to comment?
Yeah, something quick, just off topic, but I guess just in the Q&A here. I did have a separate subject in reference to the wildfires and the monitoring. Actually, I'm talking to you guys from my mobile trailer that I provide support to the command post with the fire. I don't know if you can see the map behind me. This is the Bobcat wildfire that where I got to work. I spent quite a bit of time there. But I did notice in reference to our topic as far as collecting data and as far as the wildfires, haven't read much about it. Of course, obviously the topic at hand is what I've been concerned about here in my local community or in my neighborhood really. But a reference, and hopefully I don't get caught out, but if I do to go work on one of these fires, how are we collecting that data as far as air quality? I know monitors. I did see the governor's OES trailer there. I'm not sure if they actually had monitors there to collect that data, if it's useful, and if it's something that Carb is actually looking at or considering, or is it really anything that's worth looking into?
That's an interesting question, and I'm going to ask Robert to jump in here because as I recall from some of the previous wildfire events, I know there's some monitors out there that collect some data, but I didn't know all the details on those.
Yeah, well, there, when those fires occur, a lot of times we deploy our mobile monitors as well to help out the Office of Emergency Services. We actually have a section within our lab that handles those direct requests as well. So I can certainly look into that now, but typically we do respond to those and set up monitors and to monitor pollutants, a particulate matter in particular. So I'll look into what your comment is and get back to you on that one.
Thank you, Robert. I appreciate it. Yeah. I don't know if I can take my little low-cost monitor and put it in my my unit here. Maybe that's useful, but it's interesting, especially working out there and just being at that, seeing and smelling. Really, the smell. It's something to behold. I got to tell you, it's it's my first experience, and wow, just these amazing these firefighters that they're going through, and just to really truly understand. I think it's important to see that data, and if we have those resources available, if not, are they being implemented to get out there? But thank you for taking my question.
And also too, I wanted to point out, Trish left a link in the chat as well to a wildfire emissions page in our website. Trish, yeah, I don't know. Trish, did you want to say, I give you a chance to talk if you wanted to say anything about that?
No, I don't know anything about it directly aside from when I would provide it to others when they ask a similar question. I hope it's helpful. There are some contexts on the webpage itself.
Thank you, Trish. I will definitely look into it.
Okay, great, thank you for that. I also there was a question in the chat from Laura Rosenberger, who asked if we have, she said, do you have a replay of this listening session? I heard that there will be a heavy duty vehicle workshop now, but I found this instead. Too many workshops are at the same time or all on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I can only listen to one per day. So I know the workshop, I know that we're recording, but I'm not quite sure about the availability of that.
So I was just gonna comment, I did message Laura back and I have your contact information, Laura, so I'll send you the recording link when it's ready. Does that answer your question?
Actually not sure. Where is she still online? I'm not actually sure if she's still online. I'm not.
Yeah, I think her question may have been about, there's this meeting and then there's some other meetings also coming out of Carb, and we unfortunately, I think for in this particular case, have some overlapping meetings, and so that creates some attendance challenges, which I understand. But yeah, this one is recorded, and so folks can catch up later if they weren't able to attend directly.
Okay. Any other folks that would like to ask any last questions? I was trying to scroll back in the chat to see some of those folks that we weren't able to get to earlier, but I'm not sure. Some of them I don't think are on the line anymore. So yeah, I do see. So I'm not seeing any hands, and let me go. I'm not seeing anything else in the chat either right now.
Okay, looks like we may have come to the natural end. Okay, if there are no further, further comments, and I know we're over time, but I always like to make sure, just in case there's some lingering things, we make ourselves available. But if there's, nothing further, we can go ahead and close. And then, one parting thought is you have our contact information. If questions arise for you afterwards, you think of something later, by all means, reach out to us. And, we're happy to engage with you in conversation about what's on your mind, any other, additional questions that you may have. And so with that, I think we can go ahead and close. And thanks once again for joining us tonight.